something else in here, this is like a number, right? And let's say below my dynamic text, I'm displaying this dot state, that's something else. And I take a look here. So that didn't change 200 at all. That value remains exactly the same, which is great because it might look like when I'm setting the state, I'm actually removing this value entirely, right? Because I didn't specify it here. So you don't need to worry about that. Set state will only change the state that you care about, basically, and leave everything else exactly the same. Is it making sense to everyone so far? Okay, so that's the traditional way to do it. But in this case, it's kind of complex. We only wanted to change one thing, right? And we don't really have that much of a state to speak of. So having to change up our entire function into a totally new bit of syntax was like a lot of work. If you want to do this more quickly and just kind of drop in something that's going to change dynamically, that's what hooks are for. Hooks are designed to use inside functional components, and they only work in functional components. And the basic idea behind hooks is you just define a variable that's going to change and how it's going to change, and you just manage that particular variable. You're not managing a whole state object. It's just, this is one thing I want to change. And you can add as many as you want. You could have 20 hooks in a particular thing, in a particular component, and change them all. At that point, you might want to start thinking about using a state object because it might get confusing. But let me show you how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of a whole bunch of stuff I just did. I'm going to turn my header back into a function. So I'm deleting the state at the top. Oops. Back into function my header, bring in some props. I'm not actually using the props right now, so it doesn't matter. So I'm going to get rid of my dynamic state. I'm going to get rid of this onClick thing here. Okay, let me make sure I didn't break anything. And I did break something. Oh, it doesn't look like that. There we go. Okay. So you'll notice this import is underlined in yellow because I'm no longer using the React import. So I can get rid of that or not. Probably a good idea to keep that clean though. Oh, never mind. That's not why I was underlining it, but that's okay. Okay, so now we're back here. We have a button. You can click it. Nothing happens. We have a simple function, takes in some props. So here's how you bring in hooks. So this is an import from React. It's called useState. It's a named import like we were seeing before. So useState is a function. We're going to give it, essentially, you call it and it gives you back a variable and the function that you can use to change the variable. So you're probably gonna see a lot, it's gonna look a lot like this. It's gonna be like, we're essentially giving back an array and we're defining the array as we call the function. It's a little confusing, but this is generally how you will see it done. So let's say we're gonna call this dynamic text again. I've got some square brackets here because I'm defining a couple things that are an array. And then set dynamic text. And I call useState. So if this looks a little weird, yeah, basically useState, I'm calling the function. useState is going to give me back an array that has two things in it. Those don't have names yet. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just giving names to those two things. Those things it's giving me are first a variable and second a function that changes the variable. And that's what I'm doing here. So if I go into, and I can also pass useState a default value like that. And then when it gives me back the variable is going to have this default that I passed in. And I can show you an example. So I'm going to add a little paragraph here, some curly braces. Let's put the dynamic text back in. And if I go to my browser, cool. I should see default value. So now I have this function, set dynamic text, and I can call that anywhere I want. Anytime I call that, not only is it going to update dynamic text, but React is going to know dynamic text changed, and it's going to know to refresh the whole page and show the new version. So if I go back into my onClick here, I'm just going to call set dynamic text. value. And when I go back into here, whoops, what did I break? Okay, once again, I needed to refresh. This is acting a little interesting right now. I don't know. I don't know exactly why I'm seeing that, but oftentimes you just refresh and things will fix themselves. So do keep that in mind, especially if you see really weird error messages like that. It sometimes gets kind of stuck in a weird state because maybe you were editing, saved. I save compulsively constantly while I'm editing, which is probably not what React wants. So let's go ahead and click this, and button clicked. Cool. So this is obviously a way less intrusive way to do the exact same thing. When you're only worried about one variable, you only want to be able to change it at will, then hooks are really great, quick and clean way to do that. Any questions on that? Okay. So we're about an hour in right now. I think now might be a good time to do a quick 5-10 minute break. And then we will regroup and go on to some more stuff. So in the meantime, you know what? I'm not in the Slack right now. Maybe I should be. I'm in the Code Platoon Slack if you want to send me any questions or anything in there, if anything comes to you, or you can just wait until we're back and ask me directly. But yeah, 5-10 minutes sound good, everybody? Cool. All right, see you shortly. All right. Give everybody a minute to settle back in, and then we can start. Anyone have any other questions or any clarification they wanted before we move on? I'm going to have you all kind of do a do-it-yourself segment. Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to be here, of course, so feel free to throw something in the chat or just ask if you have any questions. But share. Okay. So your assignment now, create a click counter. So we've gone over how to have that click functionality update something in state. But in this case, we want to keep doing it every single time that you click the button. So you can set this up however you want. You can create a new component. You can put it in the header. You can put it in the body. And you can use either class syntax or hooks, depending on what you prefer. But basically, all we want to do is make sure that every time you click that button, it just increments the number so you can see how many times you've clicked it. Any questions? All right, I'm going to give people 10 minutes to start with, and if we need more time, we can go ahead and add more time. I'll say 15 minutes. So this is, I don't want to pressure anyone. And then I will check in.
Is anyone else having a babble jest error happen to theirs when they try to run npm start or yarn start?
Yes. You just remove them from your folder.
This happened the first time you did it, or was it working and then it stopped working?
No, it's been happening the whole time. I've been trying to fix it behind the scenes, but someone say something about removing it from folder.
Yeah, if you go to your home directory and then no modules, you remove jest and babble jest, it'll work.
You generally shouldn't need to do that. I mean, if that's works as a temporary solution, that's fine. But no modules isn't something you should be really modifying on your own. That's something that npm or yarn should be doing for you.
So, Quinn, what would you recommend?
Can you send? Do you want to just maybe put in the chat the exact error message you're seeing?
Sure. I think it's too long to put in there, but I'll try to.
You know what? Let me open up Slack. Why don't you put it in the Slack?
Okay.
I don't know if there's a channel.
Yeah. Are you in the Mike Platoon channel?
Maybe. Let's find out. Hang on, I need to. Because that'd be good anyway. Then we'd have a record of our discussion about it.
If not, I can add you. Oh, there you are. Quinn, are you on our Slack?
I'm on the Code Platoon Slack. I see general, and that's it. So maybe I'm just on that channel.
Yeah, I'm trying to add you to the channel, to Mike Platoon, that is.
Rod, can you look in the Slack, in the Mike Platoon channel of Slack, and see if that was the same error you had?
All right. Quinn, I just added you to Mike Platoon.
Great.
Yeah, it looks like the same. error I was having with npm start or yarn start.
Are you? I think you're not. Are you not inside the project folder? You might have run. It looks like there's a node modules thing that's just right inside your users folder. I would get rid of that because that probably got installed when you accidentally ran yarn install, but not inside of a project.
Sorry, say that again.
So I'm seeing users Augustus node modules. I'm guessing that is Augustus is just your, that's just your like basic users folder, right? There's no app in there, I'm assuming.
That might be.
So yeah, if you run yarn or npm install anywhere, it will just try to install stuff in that folder, even if there's not, even if
Yes.
there's an app there. So I think what's
I
happening.
ran it in my React. Well, I created the app I created was called React Workshop,
Okay.
and that's where I ran yarn start.
Okay. Well, I think if you just delete the node modules folder from, not from the React folder, but from one step higher inside of Augustus there,
Okay.
just delete that, then it should work. And then you would go back into your create React app folder and run again.
All right. So that's in like users.
Users Augustus, there should be a node modules folder right there according to this error message that
Okay.
probably doesn't belong. And I think, yeah, what's happening is that, because the thing is that the node keeps looking up in higher folders for another node modules folder to sort of act as like the authority, because these things can go, because all of your dependencies have their own node modules as well.
Got it.
So it doesn't know that it's at the top level basically. And I think that's where the error is coming from.
Okay, so I deleted that. Let's try to run it again. It's thinking. Let's see. Rod, did you catch all that?
Yeah, I saw I had one of those folders in my user folder, so I'm trying to delete it now and see what happens.
That appears to be working for me.
Awesome.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to put that in the chat so that we have a record of it.
Yep, and now I've got a little, Jimmy Neutron thing spinning around on my screen.
Nice.
All right, great. Thank you.
No problem. All right, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. How's everyone doing? If you need more time, or we're getting pretty close. Your faces all look hardworking, but that can mean a lot of things. So,
A little more time would be great.
yep, no problem. Say 10:35. Let's regroup, and I'll go through how I would have done it.
Quinn, do you mind switching back to your code?
Nope. Do that.
Thank you.
Everyone see that?
Yep, thanks.
No problem. All right, everybody. So it's 10:35. We're able to make some good progress, and I'm just going to show you how I would do this, and then we can discuss if you have any questions or issues along the way. Sound good? All right. So let me verify this is all still working. Okay, so currently, I click once, state changes, that's it, does not change back. So basically, whether you're using state or hooks, you just need to be, instead of storing a piece of text, this time we're going to be storing a number. So I'm going to call this click count, changing the existing hook that I've already created. Change that to set click count, and the default value is going to be 0. So it doesn't matter that I've changed this from a string to a number. The hooks just know how to handle it, basically. And now, what I need to do here is I need a little bit more logic. So instead of just setting this to a new value, I could just set it to 1 and basically be back where we started. Or whoops, still using dynamic text. Here we go. Okay, so there's the click count. I'm going to go ahead and make it a little clearer what that number means. There we go. So now I'm doing what we were doing before. Basically, it's only going up to 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take click count, which has the current value, and I'm just going to add 1 to it every single time that we click. Now I go back in. Now every time I click, this goes up.
Hey, Quinn, I have a question on that.
Yep.
So I tried +=1 initially and ran into problems, and then I found some documentation that just said do +1. Why does it work that way?
+=1 means that means click count equals click count +1. Like you are making a statement right there. That's like an entire bit of code. Like it's a shorthand for this. So where you could say click count equals this, and now this will happen every time this renders. If you say +=1, you're saying the exact same thing. So what you're doing there then is if you do that inside of set click count, you are now setting click count. I'm not actually sure exactly how what's gonna happen there. You're mutating click count, but you're not doing it through this function that you've been given. So it may not work. In fact, I'm not even entirely sure. Let's see what happens when you do that. I'm not sure if that gives you an error message or what. Oh, I see. Were you trying to do that? You weren't doing it inside the function.
Well, though I did have it inside set click count as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me see what it actually does. Okay, so it gives us an error because click count is read only. Click count is actually behaving a lot like a prop here, essentially. It's coming in through use state. The use state hook is handling its updates. So you're not actually changing the value so much as you are telling the hooks to change the value, and then they do it for you and give you back the new version. So what was happening there, if you do this, you are now setting click count to, if you do that like that, you are now setting click count to the result of this, like what this is returning, which is undefined. So you're actually setting it as undefined, but you're also changing it first. So I think probably you're still going to get that error message. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Anyone else have any other questions? All right.
Sorry, for these variables that'll use hooks, do you have to, would you create like a different line for every variable, or could you set like multiple variables in the same line?
I don't know how you do it in multiple lines, because what you're doing here, or sorry, I don't know how you do it multiple variables in the same line, because you're only calling this once. You're calling use state. Use state is giving you back 2 values, and that's it. So you would need to do multiple lines, yeah, if you wanted to do like that new thing like that. Yeah, you would pretty much have to do it on a new line. I don't know how you'd consolidate it.
I guess there's one way you can, instead of just passing it in a number, you can pass it in an object like class state. like a state is an object in a class component. So you just have use state and pass in an object with a key of click count.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that has like
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's not that clean.
I don't know even how that would work necessarily, because when you're changing, objects are a little weird in JavaScript. So like you can set an object as a constant, at which point it should be read only, but you can then change the values within the object, and the object itself stays a constant. I have no idea how hooks would handle that. I probably would be careful not to do that because maybe it would work just fine, but I would expect some potentially weird behavior there. If you actually passed in an entire object. If you really needed an object, I would say you probably want to be using state the more classic way, no pun intended. So yeah, great. So we're gonna move on. I want to do something a little bit more practical. Obviously, something like a click counter doesn't really have a lot of value in a real app, but something you will probably be doing a lot is taking in some kind of input from the user and having to interpret it in some way or use it. If you're actually doing forms, you probably want to use form libraries because a lot of these problems have been solved already, but I figured let's do a basic text field and let's play around with that a little bit. It's a great way to see how React can work really handily with built-in HTML stuff like that. So we're gonna make a really simple form that's just one field, and we're gonna update the state every time that form changes. So I'm going to get rid of the button here. I'll get rid of my click count. I don't need that anymore. Instead of click count, let's call this entered text. Let's set the entered text here. And the default value will be just an empty string. All right, so now underneath the image, I'm going to go ahead and put input. I can put a little placeholder stuff here. This is just HTML. Again, by the way, this is not React specific stuff. Cool. All right, so now I have a text field. It's just a basic HTML thing. It's not doing anything right now. It is firing off a whole bunch of events, though, every single time that I enter stuff into it, every time it gets focus, every time it loses focus. The browser's just doing all of that independently of me. So what I need to do now is if I want to change this text, oh yeah, I should actually show the entered text. Let's put that up here. Oops. Okay, there we go. Yeah, this is getting it's a little bit slow to update for me. I don't know if that's happening to any of you, but I think part of the reason I'm getting weird error messages is because I'm saving before I actually finish typing and it tries to load too fast. Okay, so I'm typing in here, nothing's happening. The state is not actually getting updated. So I need to be able to call set entered text every time this changes. So the way I do that is an HTML input has a built-in thing called onChange. Yeah, onChange. And it's going to call that prop every single time that you type or remove type if you hit backspace as well. Now the thing is, it's going to give a whole bunch of information. It's not just going to give the text. I need to actually be able to find the text in all of the information it gives me every single time it happens, and I'll show you how that is. So I think it's usually referred to as an event. Basically, that's a change event it's going to pass back. And I don't know exactly what's in there. I literally don't remember exactly what's in there or exactly how I need to get the text out. So I'm going to do this the way I would do it in real life. And I'm going to just put a little console log in here. And I'm going to examine this event every single time I change it in the console and figure out where the text is in there. And then I can pull that out. I could also just look this up, but this is a little bit more fun. So what I'm going to do here is I'm in Safari right now, but if you're in Chrome or Firefox or whatever, there should be basically the same command to open up your console. It might be under like a develop thing or something. You probably, I don't know, have you all gotten into using the console in a browser before? Is that something you covered? Okay, cool. Super, super handy for debugging. There's a lot of great tools. One of the really cool things about React is it'll actually even let you put like breakpoints in your code. It'll open up your JavaScript for you and you can look at it in here. None of this stuff used to exist. You used to need specialized tools for this. So it's really cool that every browser is now like an amazing debugging tool, basically. So I've got the console open. I'm just gonna start typing. Okay. You see a whole bunch of stuff just popped up in here. So yeah, synthetic base event. This is the actual thing that, at least in Safari, but it'll be pretty much the same in every browser. This is all of the data that it's giving me back every single time that something changes inside of that text input. So if I drop this down, I can inspect it a little bit. What I'm actually looking for here, there's probably several places where this might exist actually, but I'm gonna look at target. And I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, there's a lot of stuff in here. I think it's target value. Or not, no, it's not value actually. I'm gonna keep looking around until I actually see the text that I input, because it's in here somewhere. Maybe it's native event. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff in here. I really thought it was target value. Interesting.
I found my text under target value.
Okay, I guess it's just showing up a little weirdly here. Well, what I'm going to do is just to verify that is I'm going to do event.target.value and see if it gives me some more information, since it's not going to be trying to spit out an entire giant object. Yeah, there we go. So in that case, all that information that we got from the console was actually kind of a problem because it obscured the actual simple value that's in there. But yeah, that's all we need. Target, I think, is essentially just like the input itself, and the value is just what's currently in there. So as you can see it.
Quinn?
Hmm?
Is that going to be it for, I mean, are we going to be using event.target.value for like 90% of the things we do essentially to get a hold of something?
No, you're probably never going to use this at all. Like I said, you probably would use a form library instead. Something like Formic is really good. There's a ton of them, and they handle all sorts of stuff like, you know, validating different inputs and showing error messages and hooking into an actual like API call and stuff like that. You would really want to do that probably rather than doing it yourself. I just like to show this so you can kind of get a little look at the guts of what's going on, because underneath the hood, those libraries are all doing something like this.
Formic.
Yeah, Formic, F-O-R-M-I-K. That's one that I've used a bit, and it's the best experience I've had. Yeah, generally for anything is complex, because forms get surprisingly complex, especially if it's like, you know, you have certain needs for a password, and user's name needs to be longer than a certain amount. This email address needs to be formatted like an email address, and you need to double check that. There's all sorts of stuff like that, and anytime you get an error, you need to make sure that you can highlight the specific field that was specifically wrong and show the user the error. This gets really complicated. So that's why I would highly recommend using a library for something like that. They generally take as much of the complexity out as they can. So, okay, so we're getting the event.target.value. And now that we know that that's what we need, instead of just logging it, I'm going to set the entered text as precisely that. Hello. Boom. And it all updates immediately. Once again, this is something that React has just made us all very used to, but remains, to me, somewhat miraculous that I'm typing and just instantly everything is updating right away. There's just this one-way conduit pretty much between, you know, what I've typed that I've now connected to this particular value, and I don't have to worry about updating the screen or anything like that. It just happens magically. How's everyone doing so far? Is this making sense?
Yeah.
Great. So now here's where we're going to start getting into why you actually would need to be storing these values, right? Let's add a submit button, and we're going to show an alert with that value that we're getting. So this is something we're doing we're just showing an alert because it's an easy way to see if things are working. But in the real world, we probably have a submit button, and then you would actually be making an API call with the values in your form. So you need to have the values in your form somehow. Traditionally, the way HTML did this was sort of built into the browser. You would kind of wrap everything in a form element, and it would keep track of the values, and then you would go to a new page, you'd load up an entirely new page, and it would carry those along with it as either post or get variables. But that required you loading a new page, which is something that the modern web doesn't do that much. We've sort of moved into what React does a lot of, where you really have just one page, and that page is constantly updating through JavaScript. You're not actually opening new pages all of the time. Sometimes that's not always the best solution to a particular problem, but so in this case, before we submit anything, we need to know what value has actually been entered into the field. So now we've got it, and so we can take that and use it elsewhere. So let's go ahead and add a button. Add an on-click, on-click function here, and I'm just going to throw up an alert with entered text. Submit. There we go. So as you can see now that I've got these values, I can easily pass them around and do other things with them. And so if you were building your own form library, you probably would do something kind of along those lines. Okay, before we get into that, let's yeah, okay, it's not your turn yet. Sorry. So one thing I want to show you, and then this is going to go into your final do-it-yourself segment, is how you can conditionally show components on screen. This is a really common thing you're going to do in React, and one of the things that it makes pretty easy. And there's a lot of ways to do it, because since everything that's being returned, you're returning JSX. That's what gets shown on screen. What you return is entirely based on your own logic that you're writing yourself. So there's a few different ways to do this. But let's say like we want to wait until the user has submitted and not show a component until then. So I'm just going to make a really simple component. I'll make a new one here. So I'll create a function, and I'm going to call this submit success. Inside of it, I'm going to return I'm just going to make a simple paragraph. It's just going to be text. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than that. But you can make this very fancy. You could have it glowing and sparkling if you wanted, and all of that could live within your component, and you don't have to worry about that complexity making all the rest of your code super long. Successfully submitted. Great. And I'm going to go ahead and put that at the bottom underneath the button. Submit success. Okay. So now, of course, it just shows up right away, right? I haven't actually successfully submitted. And even if I refresh the page when I haven't typed anything or touched the button, it still shows up there. So we only want this to show up when the user is actually submitted. So there's a few ways we can do this. We could have submit success itself handle whether or not it gets shown, or we could have my header decide whether or not to render submit success. There's a couple options here. Probably the easiest way just to show you right now is to have my header handle it, because my header already knows what's been entered and it has the button that we're actually submitting. So first off, we need some way to know if we submitted or not. So we're going to create another hook, another variable here that just stores whether or not the user has clicked submit. So call it has submitted. Set has submitted. And we're going to set that default value to false. And then down here, what I can do is I can open up some curly braces here. And what I can do here is I can check a certain condition and I can decide whether or not I want to display something or not. And one kind of shorthand way you might see this done sometime is this. I'm basically what I do, like, okay, if has submitted, then, show this basically, right? But that's kind of awkward, as you can see, like that syntax doesn't really work in here because of the curly braces get confused. There probably is a way to do that, but generally you're going to see it in this shorthand instead. What you do is has submitted and. There we go. So this basically just means if this is true, then we're going to return this. So if I go open up my, nope, doesn't like that. Oh, you know what? It's because it still hasn't refreshed. Okay. So now it's gone, right? Nothing is there. But if I hit submit, oh yeah, right, I didn't change the variable yet. So I actually need to change has submitted. So instead of showing an alert, let's get rid of this and let's just set has submitted to true. So now when the button gets clicked, that should become true. This should see that this is now true and we should see submit success. And it actually doesn't matter if I've entered anything or not. All right, everyone following that so far? So this is starting to get into a little bit more what an actual React app would look like. This kind of logic, waiting for a user to do a certain thing and then showing something. You're probably going to see something like that in your practical needs when you're developing. All right, so if you're all with me so far, then I want to take the rest of this time to have you do another do-it-yourself segment. And let's say, so I was able to submit, even though I submitted something blank, right? Like that's not something you generally want to do. And this is actually logic that you generally do want to have on the React side. Sometimes if you want to check to see if the user entered the right kind of password or something like that, that's often backend logic you'll do. You'll send it off to the API, and if the API sends back an error message, then you'll display that to the user. But if you want to make sure the user has actually entered something before they submit something, that's your responsibility on the front end to ensure that that happens. So this is actually a common problem. So what I want you all to do is take where we're at right now and make sure the user has entered a certain number of characters before you actually let them submit. And I'm going to leave the code that I've done up here so you can all see it. Is that pretty readable for everybody? Great. Let's do I'll give about 20 minutes for this, and then we'll see how everyone's doing. Regroup at that point. Sound good? All right. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions. Ping me the Slack is probably a good way to do it so that we can have a little discussion there. We've got a record of it.
Quinn, I just dropped a question in the chat.
In the chat or in the Slack?
Chat. Sorry, should have done.
Oh, sorry. Everyone can still see my code, right?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Should only be sharing the code.
Hey, Quinn, I have kind of a broad question. Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, so this is all new to me. I'm pretty used to like document.get element by ID or class name and all that kind of stuff. What is the best way to kind of transition your brain to think in the React way? Because I notice this is a completely different way of thinking when it comes to like getting a hold of stuff, you know?
Yeah, generally you should, yeah, I'm trying to think of a good succinct way to say it. I mean, yeah, traditionally the way you do this kind of work before React is you have the HTML is kind of the actual HTML on the page is sort of the source of truth. And I think that React is in many ways the opposite. So you're not worried about, the JavaScript is not this kind of thing floating around the side that is carefully searching through the HTML, finding the right things, changing their values, grabbing values from them, sort of shuffling around and doing all its logic based on the HTML. It's more like you are structuring your JavaScript. Everything is happening in JavaScript. Your API calls are happening there, and you're getting back JSON, and you're interpreting that or whatever, or you're interpreting input from the user that way as well. Because like if you're using a library, that's how it's going to be. So generally, you're doing all this logic in JavaScript, and then eventually you output some JSX, which gets turned into HTML, essentially. And that is like the HTML in some ways becomes a bit of a black box for you. You're not writing the actual HTML that shows up on screen. React is doing that. It's even creating, I think in many cases, its own like CSS classes and doing a whole bunch of stuff there. I think. I'm actually not sure if it does that. I might be thinking of some other tools, but that I think might be the way to sort of rearrange your thinking around the way you build logic, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, Thank you. It does.
Hey everyone, sorry for that little delay there. All right, how's everyone doing? Were you able to figure it out? Any issues? Cool. Why don't I go ahead and I'll show you how I do this. So, so I can move this stuff around. All right, so rather than has submitted, I think just being set to true or false, what I'm going to do instead is oh wait, actually I can keep that the same. Never mind. I'm going to create a new hook here, and I'm going to say, actually, I'm not even going to create a hook. I'm just going to create a new variable that checks the entered text and sees if it's over a certain length, and then I'm just going to use that in order to determine whether you can click this. So this will run every single time that this re-renders. So anytime we change the value, it's going to re-render, and this will run, so it should always be up to date. So I can call, I'm just going to call it can submit. And that's going to be, I can just check the entered text lengths, since that's a property of the string. And I'll just make sure it's over 0, or I can make that whatever I want. I could say you have to have a minimum of 5 characters or something. And then down here, buttons have a natural disabled state, just built into the HTML. So I'm going to say basically, if can submit is false, then I'm going to disable that button. It will not let you do anything. I could be a little bit more explicit if I want. Put some text on the bottom, maybe that says, if you click it, it says, hey, you need to enter more text than that. Let me show my entire screen. But for our purposes right now, oops. Cool. So let me refresh because successfully submitted is still showing up. All right, and you can see right there, the submit button is not enabled, it's grayed out. And as soon as I start typing, it becomes available. And actually, if I delete stuff, it also then turns off. Does that make sense to everybody? That's just one way you could do it. You could, you don't have to use the disabled property necessarily. You could make the button not even appear if people haven't entered a certain amount. Do your own CSS or messaging, however you want. But basically, it's all in your control pretty much. Great. So that basically is React as far as the basics of it go. Like I said, there's a lot of other tools, you know, Redux being one of the big ones, but there's other options in addition to that in terms of like how you manage state for like a really big app, how you're doing your API calls. There's something you might hear of called Apollo, which has its own very kind of unique way of interacting with an API and displaying stuff on screen. So it can get much, much more complicated as you start getting into building your own proper big apps. But as far as the basics of React go, this is basically all you need to know. You can kind of take this and run with it. Once you can create components, you can update state dynamically, you can pass props in between components. That's most of what you're going to be doing as far as building a UI in React over time. So you can take these basic building blocks and you can kind of scale up the complexity as much as you want. And really, most of the other tools that you get beyond this, unless they're doing something really specific, they're often just to make it easier for you to handle large apps, to handle a lot of data that's moving around in ways that make sense. They're less about enabling you to do something at all and more about letting you do it in a cleaner, more predictable way that's easier to test and debug and handle as it gets bigger. Because the basic building blocks are not that complicated. It's just up to you to how complex you want to make it. So that is essentially the entirety of my talk. Hope this was helpful to people. So we have a half hour blocked left. I'd love to take that time just to answer any of your questions. If you want to just ask questions in general too about, you know, about TableXI or some of the mobile work I do, I'm happy to answer any of that. And I'm in the Slack. You know, you can always send me messages through there if you're curious about anything.
I have one, Quinn. Just can you briefly go over, and it may be a little bit beyond the intro scope, but just maybe the basics of the use effect hook, because I've seen that come up with some of my research here. over the past hour. It keeps popping up in different
Mhm.
different things.
Yeah, use effect is a hook where, so it's much like use state. You can, try to give a good quick example. It comes out of React just like use state does. Use effect is a function that can be fired basically when something changes. You can tie it to a specific property. And if you only want to do something when that changes, then it allows you to do that basically. It's kind of a replacement for some of the, I mentioned that when you have a full-on class, you have these different life cycle methods. So you have methods that fire when the class is first created, methods that fire when it's first mounted, like it becomes part of the view hierarchy. And you also traditionally had a method in there that fired anytime it was about to get new props, basically. And that was called component did receive props or will receive props, I think. And they deprecated that a while ago. And they've always seemed to have this kind of, it's always been a bit of a hard thing to do, but it's something you often need to do. And I think React tries to discourage you from doing it, but there's times where you, even though props are like sort of designed to just go, be passed into a component, and the component should just use them if they're there or not use them if they're not there. And React kind of wants the logic there to be fairly simple, but there are times when you want your components to have a little bit more logic to them and to do things specifically. If a component comes in and it has this particular value, oh, maybe then I want to show this, or I want to prevent this functionality or something like that. Like you specifically want to capture that moment when that change happens in order to do something. So one example might be a common one is like, I want to close this little pop-up view when I get a response back from the server or something. And that can be kind of a hard thing to do in just standard React, because you would need to pass in some kind of property that says like, okay, you got this response, but then you don't want it to stay there. You don't want that property to be persisted. Like, hey, you got a response, and then that just exists all the time. I'm not sure if this makes any sense, but these are actual issues I've come up with. So use effect is designed to kind of be a more elegant way to deal with that, where one thing changed and I want to do something specific right now, and I like check that only when that particular property changed, rather than every single time, because otherwise I could put something in the logic here, that runs every time that this renders, and anytime that prop updates, the render should run again. So you can do that. Use effect is more like, I don't want to do this every single time. I just want to watch this one thing and do things in a particular instance when that changes. If that makes any sense.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Quinn, I have a question.
Yep.
So now, from what I understand, with like the advent of hooks and the way that you can control state through hooks in functional components, is there any real reason to use class-based components anymore? And then more so like in your day-to-day now, like actually working on a real production application. Mm-hmm. And I understand that you do mostly mobile, so it's like React Native, and I don't know much about that, but do you think it's something still very prevalent, like seeing classes in React applications, or do you think most people at this point have kind of like gone with hooks and they just use functional components for everything?
I think that my impression of kind of where the community is going is usually based on React itself, like its own help docs and things like that. If you're looking at really the community overall, there's always just like this broad spectrum of who's kind of catching up to the newest stuff. If you look through all your like packages and everything. So there's not necessarily consensus. I actually was arguing with one of our other developers about this recently, though. He feels very strongly in favor of keeping classes because he wants to be. I do think there is something where if you're using listeners or something where the class will essentially stay in memory, I think, longer than the functional component will. This was the argument he was making. So if you want to be using listeners for something, then that might get screwy if you're using the functional components. My argument was you really shouldn't be using listeners in React because React kind of makes them not that relevant. But there are certain situations where it might be one of the easier ways to do things, like a navigation library we use, for example. makes it surprisingly hard to discover when the navigation state is changed. It's kind of, unless you use a listener, for example. So that was one instance where that did come up. So I guess I feel that, yeah, the very fact that these exist and they're becoming more popular shows that there's a desire there to move away from classes. And I do think that probably these will just become a lot more popular and widely used than classes overall, because there's just less boilerplate code and it kind of keeps everything simpler. But I don't think that means that classes don't have a place at all, I guess. You will still see it in legacy code, so it's good to know how they work. And if you really want to do something complicated, then a class might be the best way to go in that particular instance. If you really want to manage a lot of state, this would have to be something that's probably out of, like, you're unlikely to be doing this in most apps. Like, why do you have all this complexity? But maybe you're doing something with a lot of animation and a lot of complicated user interaction of some kind. It's just a very unorthodox thing. Then I guess a class might give you more control, maybe, but it also might not. So, but yeah, generally, I think you're going to see classes getting less common over time. And I don't think that, I think it's good to get a sense of how hooks work instead, if you're going to pick one horse to ride to bet on.
I just add there, Quinn. Yeah, you'll definitely be seeing classes in legacy code bases. It's probably very rare that they'll transition all their classes into functions, because if it works, kind of like don't fix it if it works. But definitely classes will be, if you are working in a React code base that is at least a year and a half old, you will definitely see, at least a year old, definitely see class-based components.
Yeah, there's some things that just never die too. Like, if coming from the mobile world, for example, Swift came out 6 years ago, I think, more than 6 years ago, and it was intended as this replacement for Objective-C, which is what you use to write iOS apps in, and is a really verbose and kind of clunky language in some ways. But Objective-C is still out there. It is still very valuable if you're doing like native code to know Objective-C, especially if you use React Native, because React Native uses Objective-C under the hood and not Swift. So you kind of never know. It's always good to have have a good basis of the old stuff, because sometimes it lingers a lot longer than you think it will. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, well, I can just go ahead and give you your 20 minutes back. Grab some lunch or something. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being an audience today. I hope this was helpful for you. And like I said, I'm in the Slack if you want to ping me, or feel free to send me an email. I think my email's attached to my Slack name too, so that's also an option. Yeah, always happy to answer questions, or feel free to pick my brain about anything development related. So
thank you, Quinn. Appreciate you taking the time out to conduct the workshop.
No problem. Thanks for having me again.
All right.
Thanks for coming by.
Quinn.
Quinn.
All right. With that, you can stop the recording.